Welcome to Everything is Learning, a space for curiosity, growth, and figuring things out as we go. We're glad you're here. Let's get into it.
Hello, and welcome back to Everything is Learning. Today, we are welcoming Dr. Preeti Kalra, who brings both clinical expertise and deeply personal insight to the conversation on premature birth, proving that survival is only the beginning of a much longer story. As a doctor of pharmacy with a master's in health administration, wow.
Yeah.
Preeti is a hospital-trained clinical pharmacist and currently serves as Director of Partnerships and Communications at SAATH and Head of Communications at MyJyoti, where she champions mental health awareness in South Asian communities. She also contributes to maternal and infant health advocacy through her work with March of Dimes, supporting efforts to improve outcomes for mothers and reduce premature births across the U.S. But Preeti's connection to this work is more than professional. It's personal. Born at just 26 weeks, weighing only 2 pounds, she spent the first 3 months of her life in the NICU at a time when neonatal care was still in its early evolution. Her survival is a testament to medical progress. Her journey since then reveals the often overlooked lifelong impact of prematurity. Growing up, Preeti navigated visual impairments, sensory sensitivities, and learning challenges that were not fully understood at the time. It wasn't until adulthood that she was diagnosed as neurodivergent, an experience that reshaped her career path and deepened her advocacy. Her story sheds light on long-term neurological, psychological, and social effects on premature birth, especially within communities where awareness and dialogue are limited. Through her work and lived experience, Preeti is committed to breaking stigmas, whether around mental health, neurodiversity, or non-traditional life paths in South Asian culture. She speaks candidly about the pressures of the model minority myth and the gaps in long-term care for preemies and the importance of redefining success on one's own terms. On this episode of Everything is Learning, Preeti challenges us to rethink what it means to be born premature and why the conversation shouldn't end in the NICU. Welcome. Thanks so much for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me. Super excited to be on the episode.
Fantastic. Before we get into the icebreaker question, I just got to say, I saw you on a different podcast, and when you talked about how when you were born, it was advancement, like early stages. The insulator, I forget the word for what they put, incubator for NICU babies was like just invented. And so I think about how far it's come, mostly because like my youngest son had to go to special care unit, and I'm grateful that you made it like every day. You beat the odds. Like you're a walking miracle, and that's amazing. And look what you did with your life. I'm just so psyched that you're here. And I didn't get to tell you that ahead of time.
Sweet.
So I just wanted to say, but on to the icebreaker questions so our guests can get to know you a little bit better.
Yeah, so that's me. And I was going to ask, if you were unexpectedly given $1 million, but you can only use it to create impact, what cause or organization do you feel most drawn to support and why?
So for me, I think it would be for March of Dimes to do a lot of work with premature birth. I do a lot of volunteering with them. I'm also on their fundraising chair and their associate board. So I already do a lot of community service with them. And then also I think another cause that we won't be diving into today, but I think survivors of domestic violence, unfortunately, like South Asian culture is very patriarchal, and I think more attention needs to be given to survivors of domestic abuse. So that would definitely be another cause that I would contribute to.
Oh my gosh. Yes, absolutely. Marissa and I are really passionate about that. And actually, my husband's really good friend from home, he and his wife raise, I want to say over $100,000 every single year for their chapter of March of Dimes that they do every year for their son. Shout out to the Shine family. So we donate every year and support them, and they really go out of their way to make sure everyone they know knows about March of Dimes. And I just cannot speak highly enough for the organization. And when my twins were in the NICU, we really leaned on them, and they were so supportive from afar. states away, and they were so helpful, and it's just amazing. It really is an amazing organization. So I'm so
Great
happy to
choice.
hear that other people love and work with March of Dimes too. So that's awesome. So I guess you and I talked offline about like my birth experience with my first two,
Mhm.
but how did your own early beginnings shape the way that you understand growth and resilience and identity? And how does that impact raising humans for others?
So for a long time, my story was like framed as survival, right? Like in the immediate,
Mm,
you made it, you're strong, and I carried that identity. But then as I
mm,
got older and throughout my experiences, like resilience isn't just about surviving something, right? It's about understanding how that experience shaped your nervous system, your learning, how you process the world. And so being born prematurely, like it didn't just affect the start of my life, it influenced how I processed the world, how I experienced things. And because of a lot of it wasn't recognized early, I developed ways of coping that maybe weren't that healthy, but I was doing
mm.
fine. And internally, though, it was a different story. There was a lot of turmoil. And so now as an adult, I see like growth less about pushing through and more about self-awareness, unlearning and kind of rebuilding your life in a way that works for you. And
That's awesome.
so I just think that in a nutshell, and growing up, like my experiences, I really felt functional on the outside, but inside I felt like something was missing, or I just felt different, and I didn't know that at the time.
Yeah.
Not on our list of questions, but I am curious given what you just said. What are your go-to ways to self-care? Like to combat some of
Mhm.
those coping strategies that you learned that were creating some inner
Oh my
turmoil?
gosh, I think I know one. Is
Yeah,
it dance?
yeah,
Is dance one of them? I
dance.
love your dance videos.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, I do a lot of Bollywood dancing. I just got back into it, like growing up, being part of Indian culture. We do a lot of Bollywood. So, but that was more like performances, right? This is more I'm doing for myself. And I
Mhm.
think back to my neurodivergence, I think it really eases my nervous system. And they say dance is very good for people on the spectrum. I was diagnosed on the spectrum like mild ASD, but I think and it also helps with ADHD and your coordination, right? I was also diagnosed with ADHD. So I think dance is really a form of easing your nervous system, and it also gives me a sense of connecting with community because I did not get that growing up. I felt like kind of an outsider in the South Asian community, especially because we're a very collective culture. So
Sure.
then that internal turmoil of feeling different, um, I think, but now I think, as an adult, I'm better able to connect to the community through like those kind of activities.
That's awesome. Thank you for
Thank
that.
you. Hmm.
So in doing some research ahead of this conversation, I found out that 1 in 10 infants is born in the US that I'm sorry, 1 in 10 infants born in the US are admitted to the NICU. So for parents listening, what's something that you wish caregivers understood about preemies beyond survival, besides the fact that premature birth doesn't end in the NICU?
So I think, of course, there's a huge focus on survival, right? Which makes sense. But what gets missed a lot that prematurity doesn't end when the baby leaves the NICU. A lot of preemies grow up with sensory issues. I've done a lot of research, which I sent you guys. There have been a lot of studies now, like causes a lot of sensory sensitivities, vision challenges, learning differences, neurodivergence, and how they learn and regulate their emotions and how they experience the world around them, and it's not always connected to prematurity. So I wish what caregivers really understood, and I think it's slowly changing, that you're not just raising a baby who survived, you're raising a human whose potential development may look different. And it's not something to fix, it's just something to support with different measures. And like going back to my story, going back to like the model minority myth, like, of course, in South Asian culture, it's very, very collective, very high achieving, right? There's a lot of pressure to perform. So, like, growing up, I had a lot of fine motor issues, and my dad, he always used to be like, why can't you do this properly? Like, just cutting on the dotted line, like, and I still struggle with it, or writing on notebook paper, like in a straight line, like between the lines. That was hard because that's spatial. So just certain things with fine motor skills I struggled with, and I still do. But as a kid, but they didn't really understand like what was going on. It was just like, why can't you do it properly? And so I think if that awareness had been there, it would have saved me a lot of kind of turmoil with that. And that's just one example.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You talk about turmoil in it, and the interesting part that I think I'm picking up, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that a lot of the times people can present one way outwardly, and inwardly that's where people really need to be focusing with raising
Mhm,
humans, because
Sure.
you can see struggles. That's a visual thing, right?
mhm, mhm.
You can see the not cutting on the dotted line. But what people should be focusing on is, first off, if you're in your 30s or 40s, are you cutting on a dotted line every day? You know what I'm
No,
saying?
no,
Not a life skill.
not
Sorry,
anymore.
it's just
Yeah.
not. So instead of cutting on a dotted line, what should be happening is, if you're seeing a child struggle with anything, what is going on internally should be the question. Is that kind of where you're going with that?
Yeah. And
Okay.
yeah, especially in development of confidence, right? And I think it really did derail my self confidence growing up. And even as, of course, an adult now, I'm trying to self heal and, build that confidence. But it starts from an early age, unfortunately. And I think that support can really raise a child's confidence, whether neurodivergent or not, right? This is across the board, obviously. So but and I don't blame them either. It's just that's not how they were raised. That's not how the culture allowed it. And even generally, not even South Asian, like in back in the 90s, I know we were talking that there just wasn't that awareness surrounding
Mhm.
neurodivergence and neurodevelopmental issues and premature birth like effects, long-term effects, because it was
And a
so
lot of
veiled.
that was halted by acceptance too, right? Like,
Mhm,
you
mhm.
don't wanna have to solve anything if you see it's a problem. I feel like that it felt like the '90s was so great to so many people because so many things got swept under the rug or ignored. Does that make
Yes,
sense? Like,
100%.
Mhm.
and we grew up in the '90s. Like, I'm a '90s kid. I love a lot of things about the culture, except for the things that were, like, whitewashed, swept under the rug, ignored, and neglected. I feel like a lot of science seemed neglected, and maybe that's an area of research I need to look at, is, like, how many studies were done in the '90s for neurodivergence. Um, but I agree that it seems like acceptance makes way for more to be discovered, if that makes sense.
100%. And I know we're maybe going off topic, but I needed to mention this because it's so hot right now. Like Michael Jackson's movie, right? Like
Yeah.
Michael, like a lot of things are coming out now. Like he had childhood trauma. And people
Yeah.
didn't realize that some of maybe his mannerisms or how he interacted with the world. Some people, I was reading an article, people say he might have been on the spectrum. But like now these kind of things are coming out because there's more awareness. But back in the 90s, people just thought he was weird, you
Right.
know?
Yeah. I mean,
So
it
kind of
the
tying
fact
that into it.
the fact that he was probably living with CPTSD is and we didn't know until we had a guest on last season, who talked about their neurodivergence, and we didn't know that CPTSD, was considered that. So we learned a lot from Sydney, who came on and talked to us about that. And I mean, at the very least, and I know that we're speculating and, those kinds of things, but I think the other thing you mentioned too was the word weird. And I talked to Marissa about that recently because I had made some kind of a comment at one point about somebody being weird. And I think of it as something positive, but I didn't know that people still consider like being weird a negative, because I
Yeah, yeah.
associate weird with unique. And I didn't realize that there are not only cultural layers, but there's also like um like societal layers based on your age and things like that. And I didn't mean to not know that. I just didn't ever experience that. And being told that weird was something that was derogatory was interesting to me recently.
Mhm.
Because I think that everybody is weird in their own way. And I think that that's
Way.
a beautiful thing, but not everybody thinks that. Then
We're
I think
taking back the control of that word, right?
right.
We're owning it.
Right, and I think that again, that comes with, transformation and learning and growing and sharing stories, and I think that parents are starting to learn more, and I think in educational societies, people are starting to learn more. In educational institutions, there seems to be more knowledge and awareness happening. But how can parents and caregivers better recognize signs of neurodiversity early, especially in high pressure cultures? Because I know that you talked about Asian cultures being high pressure cultures.
I think educating themselves, right? And unfortunately, if they don't have the education and, especially like being a first generation immigrant, that's probably the hardest, right? And of course, subsequent generations, like if I have kids, like it'll be easier for them because I have the awareness. Whereas like my parents came from India, first generation and or like immigrants and they didn't have that awareness. So I think just first being open, I think being open-minded is very, very important. And being even open to understanding these abstract concepts of neurodivergence and about unfamiliar things, and that can be spanned across a variety of topics. It's not just neurodivergence, but just having an open mind and being open to educating yourself, because the resources can be there, but if you don't have an open mind, if you're not willing to accept that something like that exists, then it kind of defeats the purpose.
Uh,
You're kind of going
Agreed.
on to curiosity too, right? Is like
Mhm.
people can be presented with information. They can even be told like, "Hey, this is the diagnosis," or "Hey, I think one area your research led me down to is like when people leave the NICU, I don't think there's any information that comes after that or specific support
Hmm.
that comes after that. So that led me to curiosity too, but somebody can be given everything in the world and if they're not only open-minded, but if they're not curious about it, then it could
Mhm.
lead to literally nowhere.
I I would also offer, as you were describing the ideal means for how people could better identify this. One of the things that your example brought to mind, and I have to actively work at this, is instead of why can't you draw on the lines or cut on the straight line, like I see how hard you're working at that, and
Mhm.
praising the
Mm,
effort,
over the
and also
competency.
that also assumed like you didn't know you were trying to get in between the lines, like
Mhm.
it was somehow intentional. Oh, I'm just avoiding like I'm carving my own path, right? Like you probably knew. Hey, I understand. This is the what
That
you
I
want
have
me to
to,
do,
yeah.
right? And
Right.
cut along the line, but like I don't know why I can't do it. And so I really appreciate about you talking about not only curiosity but learning, but I have to actively practice that because it's just so ingrained in me to look at why aren't you instead of
Mhm.
look at what you're actually doing. And that also reminded me like you must be an amazing problem solver. You talked about how you had to learn how to cope and that you figured that out on your own. You must be an amazing problem solver. I only say this because I saw a meme that made me cackle out loud is I am good at problem solving, but I am astute at problem creating. And like whether intentional or not. And just as you were talking about that, I'm thinking like are your parents thinking you're creating these problems for yourself? And I'm like, well, you know what? I'm a masterful problem creator. And so I really appreciate you redirecting to openness and curiosity because ultimately that is really going to lead to better problem solving. And it shouldn't be on children to
No.
figure it out.
No.
You don't know what you don't know, and you don't have the words to express that, assuming you are verbal. Right?
Mhm.
Or I
Mhm.
shouldn't even say assuming
Speaking.
you are verbal. In assuming you are speaking, assuming you have a means to communicate that. So I really appreciate everything you said, and I'm curious how, you found out that you were neurodivergent as an adult. How did that change the way you think about your childhood and what you think about yourself
Mm.
because of how you reflect on your childhood?
I think it completely changed how I see my childhood, and unfortunately, I was diagnosed at age 23. I was diagnosed in medical school,
Oh,
and
wow.
yeah, I got in, and so many years of like applying, and of course, it what I think my story kind of made it difficult because medical school is hard, right? Like not everybody can do it. So I think when I was first diagnosed, there was a lot of doubt. I even had a lot of self doubt because I was diagnosed in such a rigorous atmosphere. Like it's a really hard program. Becoming a doctor is hard, right? There's no
For
doubt about
sure.
it. It's a wealth of information, but I think it was like undergrad, I did totally fine. But I think going back and reflecting on how much work I used to do, like even in undergrad, even in high school and middle school, how many hours a day I was spending on homework. And
Mm.
I think
Mm.
it was really mass because my parents, they kind of helped me with everything else. They just said, okay, Preeti, just focus on school. And I'm an only child. I have no siblings. So all the
Okay.
attention was on me. And so they're like, just focus, we'll handle the rest. And I was able to cope with it because my executive functioning, I didn't really have to use it as much. I was focusing on one task at a time, school, school, school. Didn't really have to compartmentalize, excuse me. And and so I was able to cope with it that many years. But when I got into med school, I went out of state. That was my first time leaving home. I lived at home throughout undergrad as well. So then everything hit me like a ton of bricks,
I'll
like a really
bet.
rigorous curriculum, being away from home. I had to self regulate, do my laundry, chores, this, that. And I totally hit a wall. And looking back, I think it really did change how I see my childhood. A lot of things I used to view as personal shortcomings, like feeling overwhelmed, and it allowed me to reflect on my childhood more, like what things I used to struggle with. And I didn't really have a language for that growing up, so I adapted, I masked, and of course I had
Mm.
the support system with my parents, but I overcompensated. I really pushed myself, so then I couldn't really focus on other areas of my life, and getting diagnosed, it gave me that context and honestly a lot more compassion for my younger self. And it kind of
Beautiful.
clicked that, okay, this is why I used to feel and process things the way I did.
Glad for that.
Do you think if you got your diagnosis earlier, you would have had more compassion for yourself earlier? Or do you think
Oh,
that just came
yeah.
with maturity in med school?
I think I would have had compassion for myself earlier, and I would have made more educated decisions, right? Because I used to struggle. I struggle with like visual processing. And of course, medicine is very visual. So then I'm like, okay, but I found out way too late. Otherwise, I would have gone with something like pharmacy, which now I'm a pharmacist. That's better catered to my strengths. And that's why they say knowledge is power, right? Because you can use that knowledge to make informed decisions for yourself. And, um, I would have really, I think it would have helped me in being compassionate towards myself, but also making those informed decisions for myself at an earlier age.
Yeah. Would you have felt stigmatized? I don't I to be very transparent, I don't know enough about Asian cultures in like a middle school setting, but I do know a
Mhm.
lot about having worked in middle schools in the United States that when a child receives a diagnosis at that point and not earlier, they feel a lot of stigma and they don't want to seem different. So, do you feel like that's something that you would have felt, or would you have felt relief?
I think I would have felt stigmatized, and to be honest with you, I'm still stigmatized for it, even though I'm an adult. Like my family still has a hard time accepting it. I mean, I don't think they'll ever accept it, and I've just accepted that that's the
Mm.
way things are. So I think the stigma, unfortunately, it would have still been there. I don't think it would have made a difference, and I think it's just never gonna go away. But that's why, like, as a culture, especially nowadays, like our generation, we're trying to break the cycle. But I have accepted it that, my extended family, my family, and the culture, it just they won't be able to fully understand what it is. And it's hard. It's hard, bringing that because, again, they've been conditioned to believe. And of course, I grew up in the US, so there's more studies out there. And growing up in two different worlds, I think I could better understand it as opposed to my parents who grew up in India and it was just a different time and a different culture and different generations. So, um, I don't think it would have made a difference in terms of stigma. I think I would have still faced the same stigma
And
regardless.
how do you navigate, um, feeling stigmatized in your family? Because I would assume that that is painful,
Mhm.
and hard to navigate, but also what people have found out, and you're in the medical field, so you know this, it's something like 90% of people with ASD, it's genetic. So, it's interesting to me that your parents wouldn't think that maybe one of them were on the spectrum as well or somewhere in your family line. So, that's why I'm curious.
Yeah, and I think I do now that I like reflect to myself, I do think I'm not going to say who, but I do feel like they might one or two of them might be on it. And
Mhm.
I notice it now more that, oh, okay, that totally makes sense, like regulation of emotions. And the way they address the world, very black and white thinking, a lot of anxiety. I grew up in a very anxious, like my parents were very anxious growing up. And so I had anxiety, and it's still like they are pretty anxious beings. So I think it kind of also led me to reflect that, okay, some characteristics I saw in my family,
Mm.
and maybe past generations, like of ancestors, that maybe it was that trauma and the neurodivergence aspect, maybe it was there was just no awareness, or they didn't know what it was called. There's no label, so to speak. So I think that also, yes, gave me perspective on that.
Since you found out this information as an adult and that there are still again because of more and more information and because many of the research studies or even societal cultural norms what have you have maybe created obstacles to the diagnosis, what advice would you give to adults who are now realizing that they learn or process differently?
Um, Let me think about that. Like, I think advice to adults, like discovering differences, like you're not behind. You just have new information now, and it's up to you what you do with it. Like a lot of adults like regret, like, why didn't I know this earlier? And I was really mad, right? When I came home from medical school, I'm like, I worked so hard this many years. It took me a long time to get over it. Like they were allowing me to come back, but they're like, "You can't fail a single course now." And I had failed literally right
Just
when
what
I
one
entered.
needs, more pressure.
More
Right.
pressure, and I'm like, and there was a lot of anger because I spent a lot of my years. It's no easy feat getting in, first of all, and second of all, there was a lot of, oh, like, because it's very collective culture that, oh, you destroyed our reputation. Like, what are we going to tell everyone? Because it goes back to, and I know I mentioned this in one of my questions, like, log kya kahenge in Hindi. That's what I speak at home. It means, what will people say? So it's a lot about what will the community think, right? That, oh, our daughter came back from med school. So I think there was a lot of anger behind it, but now that I look back, I'm like, everything in life happens for a reason, but the reality is the awareness is what allows the change, and that's why I do what I do in my advocacy, because I really wanna educate kids and, like, young adults, especially South Asian adults who may be going through similar things that, you know, um, you're not you're just different. You process things differently, and the community may say one thing, but you have to stay true to yourself. And now I understand myself better. I can make better informed choices, life choices for myself that better align how I function, and going into this, like, and this kind of goes into another one of the questions, like non-traditional life choices. No, again, South Asian culture, very collective. You're expected to, you know, have a job, get married, have kids. And, the fact is, people who are neurodiverse, they have kids, but it's really, really, really hard. Especially,
Especially if you have any sensory difficulties, let alone
yeah,
other
yeah.
difficulty challenges. Yes. No. And I've, again, just meeting you, but I need to humble brag about you because something that you just, especially to our listeners, and I hope anyone from your family who might listen to this, you talked about how you just spoke Hindi like it is normal for people to speak multiple languages, especially growing up in America. Now, I recognize that you are a product of parents, like immigrants. But that said, so you found out you're neurodivergent. Not only did you learn another language, have a master's, I'm sorry, a doctorate,
Uh-huh.
you also head up major donations and organizations. You found an opportunity to get multiple degrees, navigate all this while not knowing that you had these background things, and survived in a time where any survival outside of, can you just refresh my memory? I know we said it in the bio. It was 26 weeks you were born at?
Yeah, I was born at 26 weeks, yes.
That is the very, cursor, the earliest stages of any medical history of known survival rates for babies. Like, if you were 25 weeks, I don't know that there's any cases that exist of babies surviving, right? Like, 26 weeks is the earliest on record. So the fact
At that time, yes.
Right,
Now
right.
I think it's more common, like 24 weeks, but yes, at that time it was early. Yes.
So you, I know I said this earlier, but you're a walking miracle. And the fact that you just sort of glaze over these amazingly talented feats that you have is just, as
part of
someone
me
who
wants to
didn't-
shake you and be
Yeah,
like,
or
what
hug
are you
you.
talking about?
to give you a
parents,
cake.
what are they doing?
But I think I just, and not that you don't recognize all the strengths that you have. I'm sure you do. But let's give credit where credit is due.
I
And Hindi is not an easy language to learn, period.
No.
It's like English. Not an easy language to learn,
Yeah,
period.
no.
And you know both of them. So just wanted to make sure that didn't get glazed over because that's pretty big.
I appreciate it. Yeah, no, and that's what I tell myself, right? That it's just, you don't have to live your life in a certain way. And I think this is across all cultures, not even but I think now people, if you look on social media, if you guys have noticed, people are becoming more open, like, okay, I need to live the life that's catered to me, not what society says.
Yes, we are all about personalization here. All about personalization. Personalize your life. You get one. Maybe you get others, but right now we're focusing on this one. So, you get one life, you get one opportunity to do these things, and you're taking it and you're going beyond, just so far beyond. And I guess, okay, so you have all this information, you have all this knowledge now. If you could go back and raise yourself differently, what would you have done differently?
I think, be more caring towards myself um and be accepting of myself. I think even nowadays, or even now in time, even in adulthood, I sometimes have days where I'm like, I wish I was different, right? Or I wish I had processed the world differently. Um, and I know everybody's unique in their own sense, but I think, I wish I had thought collectively. But then I'm like, I look back and I'm like, would I really be happy with that kind of life? And I've talked to my friends about this. I'm the only one in my mom's side now that's not married. All my cousins are married and then they have kids of their own. And, I face a lot of backlash for that. And then I'm like, yeah, but if I were to live that kind of life, would I really be happy? And there's a lot of stigma around it because people are like, oh, well, family, especially, what are you going to do when you're older, right? Who's going to take care of you? And I think that's a very selfish reason to have kids.
For sure.
Yeah.
you know, but it's just something you do. It's practicality. Everything is like in South Asian culture, it's for practicality. You get married, you find a guy, you get married because you should have someone to take care of you, which if it's a companion, great, but it should be on your own terms, not like a
Definitely.
contract, a business contract or a social contract per se. And then kids, you have them because you really want or enjoy with them. And I think there's so many ways to give back to the community, give back to the world, and it doesn't have to be in that traditional life kind of choice and path. And that's something I wish more people would understand, especially in the culture I come from.
Yeah.
Thanks
I
for sharing that.
Hmm.
That's hard. Like,
Yeah.
my partner and I talked about it, and we were like, this was pre this version of Trump, and this was, like, pre the world, like, falling apart right now, and we both sat down and we were like we were having issues getting pregnant, and, I was like, "Do we wanna bring kids into
Hmm.
this timeline?" Like, I and the reality of the situation is I really applaud people who know that they don't want kids because we've been talking about, like, sensory overload and things like that, and even as a neurotypical
Yeah.
person, I today was crying in my car at karate because
Hmm.
my kids were so overstimulating this morning.
Yeah.
And, like, raising humans is not easy, and I think the most valuable lesson that you're bringing to our listeners today is that we talked about this. It Raising humans is never done, and as much as society says
Right.
that we're all supposed to be culturally, like, together and raising humans and taking care of everybody, the reality is we're still raising ourselves and the learning continues. And like you said, like you can give back to your community and
Hmm.
you can give back to raising humans by sharing your knowledge, by
Yes.
participating in March of Dimes, by doing all these different things. And you're doing more right now than I can do with 3 children. So,
Oh, yeah,
like,
100%.
how is that valued differently in society? Because to me, it's the exact same value, if not more, because I'm raising humans that in my own household while I'm raising myself, while my husband is trying to raise
It's
himself.
hard.
And our bandwidth is very low to be able to do a lot of different things. However, you're out there, you're doing all of these incredible things, you're making a huge impact, a huge
To pay
difference.
it forward for sure.
Right. And
Thank
that
you.
to
Yeah.
me has the same value of raising humans.
Yeah.
And
It's a
I'm just
collective
so
contribution.
right. And there is a sense of social contract, but one of the questions that we ask everybody who comes on this season is we believe raising humans is one of the most powerful learning spaces, which
Hmm.
includes learning ourselves. What lessons do you hope we start teaching more consciously and collectively around the world to make positive change?
So I think one of the most important lessons to start teaching more consciously to especially in starting from a young age is self-awareness and not just achievement. We spend so much time like teaching people, yeah, on how to succeed like
Wow.
academically, professionally, right? But what about like internally what's going on? We don't spend enough time teaching them how to understand themselves. And just think how many of the world's problems could be eliminated if people really internally understood themselves and how they process the world, what they need to feel supported, like emotional intelligence, right? And I think that's what's missing. People can look successful from like externally and from the outside, but feel totally disconnected internally. And I think
Yes.
that's why a lot of things like depression or just feelings of inferiority, lack of self confidence, it all stems from that. And I think if we shifted towards teaching little like kids about self-awareness, emotional understanding, and flexibility and what like success looks like, we would create environments for them to thrive and not just survive. And I think it doesn't
Wow.
just impact individuals, it changes families and communities and the systems we build from the ground up. So that's what I would say. Self-awareness is key for a lot of it.
Holy
I wish-
profundity.
No kidding. I wish little Marissa could hear that self-awareness over achievement.
Yeah.
Oh, same.
That healed the inner child in me. Thank you, Preeti.
Of
I mean,
course. Yeah.
yeah.
It definitely does it for me too, that but I just think we need more of that in the world, hands down, with everything that's going on. Not to like get
Yes.
political, but just imagine if the world leaders had self-awareness. I think a lot of things wouldn't be
I
happening.
love that you giggled at it. It's true. Oh man. Well,
Yeah.
thank you so much for being here today. This was
Yeah.
incredible. Like
I
What a
really
great
enjoyed
we
it.
had I had so much fun. I can't speak for Risa, but I had so much fun. This
I
had
was
a
so
blast.
wonderful. Where can our listeners connect with you?
Yeah, sure. They can follow me on Instagram. My handle is pculver33. I'm definitely ramping up my advocacy efforts, and so they can also email me at pculver33@gmail.com if they have any questions. Also, there's a group that I'm part of. It's actually based in the UK, but it's for adults who are preemies. It's called the Adult Preemie Advocacy Network, APAN. So they have like a
Oh.
whole research like section on how, there's a lot of studies on, okay, this is like babies who are like preemie, right? But now more information's coming out on adults and prematurity. So they're a whole advocacy group dedicated to adults who are born preemie.
That's
So,
amazing.
Amazing. Thank you so much again for being here. We
Thank
can't
you for
wait
having
for
me.
Yeah, absolutely. We can't wait for our listeners to connect with you. And we hope that everybody comes for the next session and have a great day.
Thank
You
you,
too.
Preeti.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for spending your time with us at Everything is Learning. Keep being curious, keep learning, and we look forward to catching you again next time.